Okay, today we're going to keep working on chapter 2. I put up our vocab words there to give us a reminder. It's been a few days since we've done social studies from our book. We did bus safety, we've done testing, so it's been a little while. So I want us to get back into that historian mode that we were in a few days ago. Look at some of those key terms that we've talked about with social studies. Who remembers what a petroglyph is? Katie.
Carving made by people?
Yeah, it's a rock carving made by humans, not by the glaciers receding, not by animal claws. That petroglyph is made by humans. So if we find petroglyphs in an area, we know that humans have lived there at that time period. What is an elder, Tristan?
It is someone that was here in the past and is respected for their wisdom.
Yeah, they don't have to have been here in the past. They can be living right now, but it's someone who's respected for their wisdom, and it's going to be an older person in that culture where there's a lot of respect for them. What is an archaeologist? Nick.
Somebody who digs up the rocks or the bones of the people that used to live there.
Yeah, so the archaeologist is the person that is digging up things to find out about the past and what kind of evidence can they find. What is perspective? Caitlin.
A point of view from a person.
Yeah, it's one person's point of view. So there are multiple perspectives because there are multiple people about things that have happened. So you might have one perspective about something and the person across from you has a completely different perspective. So we need to remember that every person has their own perspective and we need to get all the different perspectives to get the full picture of what happened. So historians really look at getting all the different clues, all those different pieces to put together to learn about that life. Oral history. Izzy.
The retelling of stories about other people's culture.
It's that retelling of stories of things that have happened in the past, passing down those stories. So from generation to generation, you're telling those stories. Artifact. Who haven't I called on? Maddie.
Piece of history that can use for
Yeah, it's that object, that piece of history. It's the object that you can hold on to from the past. Yep. And then that scientific method and hypothesis we have not gotten to yet. We are going to be getting to those. So that scientific method we know we use in science. It's a way of doing experiments and observations. And the hypothesis is that educated guess. All right, let's look at page 16 in your textbook. So we should all be opening our textbooks to page 16. So if your table mate is not opening their book, you should give them a nudge to remind them to open their book. Page 16. On this page, we're going to learn about ancient life in Minnesota. So we have our first section is life 10,000 to 8,000 BCE. So remember that's the before Christ time. So we're at 2021. So we're 2,021 years into the BC. So this is BCE. So when we say 10,000 BC, it's 12,000 years ago. So we're talking about 12,000 years ago. What was happening in Minnesota was there were ancient humans, hunted herds of giant mammoths and mastodons that traveled north as the glaciers receded. Smaller animals such as rabbits, deer, and turtles were also hunted. Thick spruce forests grew along the edge of the glaciers. The climate was much colder and drier than it is today. So that's what was happening. How do we know that was happening? what evidence do we have of something 12,000 years ago? So if you look over to the right, it says the evidence. Archaeologists have found human remains and artifacts from this time period in different parts of Minnesota at the Cedar Creek site to the north in northern Minnesota, the Browns Valley site that's out west heading towards the Dakotas, and the Bradbury Brook site, which is in central Minnesota, right in the middle. Animal bone evidence has also been found in nearby states such as Wisconsin and South Dakota. So we know what animals were living here because they can date their bones. And they know the animals that were here because they found the bones of them. Then 7,000 to 5,000 BCE, so that's like 8 to 9,000 years ago, the large mammoths and mastodons became extinct as the climate grew warmer and drier. People then hunted other animals like bears, elk, deer, beavers, fish, turtles, birds, and giant bison. These animals thrived in the warmer climate. So did the plants that produced nuts and fruits. People's diets during this time were more varied than they had previously been. So because it got warmer and the glaciers are gone, so some of the animals are gone because they needed the cold climate. So now there's new things that moved in, the new animals that come in. A lot of these animals we still have here today. The plants that started growing, we still have here today. How do we know what was going on back then? What evidence is there? There are major archaeological investigations in 1937 near Lake Itasca, where the headwaters to the Mississippi is. They found a massive collection of stone tools and animal bones dating to about 6,000 BCE, so 8,000 years ago. Evidence of a varied diet of fruits, nuts, fish, turtles, and birds was also found. Other sites with similar evidence from this time period have been found near Granite Falls and also in Iowa and North Dakota. So again, they're finding evidence, things that were left behind. They can date how old it is. 3,000 to 500 BC, so it's getting a little bit closer. During this time period, people were staying longer in seasonal camps and were on the move less than they had previously been. Hunting and fishing continued to be very important. Growing squash and sunflowers, as well as harvesting wild rice, became more common as the climate settled into patterns similar to today. Cold winters and short warm seasons. People use copper to make tools and jewelry. So they're settling down more. They are setting up camps that they live in for the whole season. So they're not moving quite as much. What evidence do we have of this? There's burial site dating to about 685 BCE near the Mississippi River in Winona County was found to contain the remains of several humans. Also found were copper pieces, clamshells, bone and stone tools, a beaver tooth, animal bones, and red ochre, which is a pigment made from clay. Other artifacts from this time period have been found in or near Mountain Lake Duluth, Norman County, and southwest Wisconsin. So they're finding pieces of things that lived a long time ago, that they can date it back to this time period. They're seeing the changes in the lifestyle. Katie?
Yeah, I know when I went to South Dakota, they said, like, if you find a fossil, this is what you should do, because there's been many, and we have to look out for them, because there's been many there, and there's, like, a 5-year-old that found a certain tiger.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, so it's really fun to find those things from thousands of years ago, and anybody can find those fossils, like the 5-year-old you were just talking about. So then we have getting even closer to our time, 200 BCE to 1300 CE. So we're 2021 CE. So this is 1,000 years ago. So it's getting a lot closer to life today. So things are getting a lot more similar to what we're used to. Lily, can you read about what was happening in Minnesota at that time?
People created rural mounds all over Minnesota during this time period. Grand Mound International Falls is the largest at 25 feet tall and 100 feet wide at its base.
Yeah, you're doing the evidence, not the
A new religious practice became common during this time. Many people began burying their dead in mounds of earth. Most mounds were small and round, some were long, and a few were shaped like animals. Over hundreds of years, thousands of burial mounds were built in Minnesota.
So what was happening back then is things have changed a lot. Now they're noticing there's things that are pointing to the religion practice changing. They're finding there's more trade happening. Katie.
I remember when I went to Indiana, there was a place that had those mounds too.
Yeah, and you're gonna see that a lot of the Midwest. You're gonna find a lot of similar things because the same types of people lived around here because our climate was very similar. So you'll find a lot of the artifacts that are the same. Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, Iowa, Indiana, Illinois. They all have a lot of similarities because our climate was the same. Nick.
My mom had a minor in archaeology, and when we were down in Badlands, she said, "Look out for dinosaurs," and I'm like, "Mom, no."
But it's true. Like Katie said, even a 5-year-old can find those big fossils. So you should be looking out for it. Yay, Mom, for thinking of that.
It was like, she has an eye like an eagle eye, so she can see like if a toe is sticking out, and I'm like, Mom.
Well, she's trying to teach you how to look for those things. Okay, what is the evidence of all of these changes that were happening 1,000 years ago? People created burial mounds all over Minnesota during this time period. Grand Mound near International Falls is the largest that's 25 feet tall and 100 feet wide at its base. It still stands today, though parts of it were previously excavated. Uncovered were many tools and bones from Lake Sturgeon, a type of fish that could grow to be 8 feet long. So there are still sturgeon in I believe Lake Superior.
Yeah.
So they grow taller than I am. Like that's huge. Since the late 1800s, archaeologists have removed and studied many items from the Bryan Site village located near Red Wing. They found human remains, farming tools made from animal bone, food storage pits, and pottery that dates from 1000 CE to 1300 CE. Styles of pottery from regions to the west were discovered. After living there for 300 years, people abandoned the village, and no one knows why. There's no oral history on it. There's no written evidence of what happened. It's just all of a sudden the village was gone. So we don't know what happened, and we probably never will. It will just be a mystery because there's no evidence pointing to what happened. People can come up with guesses, a hypothesis, but we will never be able to prove it. And sometimes that's the case with history. There will be things that you just don't know why it happened because there's no evidence pointed to this is what happened and why. So what do you think life was like 7,000 years ago for an 11-year-old kid? So if you lived 7,000 years ago, do you think your life would be like it is now? Did you go to school, wear a uniform, go to church? What would life have been like 7,000 years ago? So that would be 5,000 BCE. What do you think, Maddie?
You would work.
You would work. You wouldn't be going to school. Parents would be saying, hey, I need you to do these chores. This is what you do. Cole?
You could be she said you could be like catching food maybe.
Okay.
Be a child.
Yeah, so you might be one of the people that goes out and does the hunting. And you might be one of the people that goes out and does the gathering of the nuts and the fruits. You might be one of the people that's learning how to cook the food or do the cleaning of the area. Maddie?
You would talk back to your parents.
Yeah, they probably didn't talk back to their parents. There's probably a lot more. This is the elder, and you need to respect them and do what they say, and you don't question it, you just do it. We're kind of guessing on that. There's no evidence of that, but it's a good guess. Did they have school?
They were school.
So what kind of education would they be learning about? When we say, somebody said homeschooled because they didn't have buildings, so they didn't go to a school building, but maybe they were taught at home. What kind of things are they being taught? Nick?
Like how to hunt fish.
Yeah, the life skills that they need. There's nothing written from that time period, so they weren't learning their ABCs. They were learning, this is how you track an animal. This is the best way to kill the big bison. It's bigger than you are, so this is how you do that. So their education was learning how to live and what they needed to do to live. It could be, these are the different types of berries. This one is poisonous. Don't eat that. This one is used for medicine to help if you have a stomach ache. Eat this berry. This one is for food, for nourishment. So their education was very hands-on, and it was learning those life skills so they can live to be an adult. Briggs?
Maybe they would be learning how to farm and stuff.
So back 7,000 years ago, they weren't quite farming yet. So they were doing more harvesting and more of hunting of the different types of animals, but I don't think they were quite farming yet. But that brings us into 3,000 years ago. So Briggs was jumping ahead a little bit in history. And 3,000 years ago, they were starting to do that farming. They were staying in their areas longer so they could be there that whole harvest, from planting the crops to the harvest of the crops. So they were learning even more skills. Farming is a different type of skill that they had to learn. And there was a lot more chores that went along to taking care of the crops. What about 1,000 years ago? So now we're into more modern time. So right now it's 2021. So we're talking 1021. So it's not quite modern time, but life is different. They're not nomadic, following the buffalo around, moving all the time. We stay in one place. We're not moving a lot. We've got the farms. What do you think life was like for an 11-year-old 1,000 years ago, back in 1000? Nick?
You'd have to probably pick the corn and harvest the food.
Yeah, there's a lot more farming. So the harvesting of the food and the taking care of the crops. Maddie?
And like taking care of the home.
Okay, taking care of the house, because you have a house now. Back 7,000 years ago, they might have had more of a portable structure, that because they were moving a lot. So think back to like the teepees that we've seen pictures of that you can take down and move. They're not huge. Now they might have more of a house because they have clay that they're using and the stone, so they could build settlements. There was a city that we learned about, the Cahokia. So they have those buildings that they're starting to make. So life is starting to look a little bit more modern. Still very different, but it's starting to be more of what we're used to. So I want us to think back to 8,000 BCE, back to the time of the mammoths and the mastodons, back to when they were very nomadic, just following the animals because that's their food source. Think about what tools they would have had. What would they make their tools out of? Caitlin?
Probably some wood, maybe.
Wood, because there were trees, so they could cut down wood to make stuff. Paisley?
Stone.
Stones. Katie?
They could also make it out of bones.
Out of bones. They hunted the bison and the mammoths. So think about how big those rib cages were on the woolly mammoth. Those things are huge, like elephant size. So those bones are huge. What can they make out of those bones?
They can make some type of more weapons, and then they can make some. They can use it for structures.
They could make some structures. They could use it for weapons, for hunting. They can make tools out of these big bones. Do they just use bones from the mammoths and the bison, Nick? Or the mastodons?
sometimes they use the skin of the hide of the buffaloes and they have those and all that.
Yeah, they use all the pieces of the animal. So they didn't just eat the meat and use those bones. They used everything. The skin they would use to make shelter and to make clothing. They didn't have thread to sew the clothes together. They would use the sinew or the tendons from the animal. They would use to bind stuff together. So they were using all the different parts of the animal. Finn,
What is a mastodon?
a mastodon is a big animal. In a minute, I can call up a picture of one so you can see what it looks like. I want to give us some time. My last group didn't get a lot of time. I want us to give you some time on what our activity is for today. Thinking back to the time of the mammoths and the mastodons, I want us to think about what kind of sled a human back then might have built. Why would they want a sled? Cole?
So like if they're hunting buffalo and they shoot it and then it's still alive and it was on a hill and they could slide down faster to go make sure and then they could go with a close range weapon to finish it.
Yeah,
So
so they might use the sled when they're going hunting. Why else might they use a sled, Paisley?
maybe while they're moving they could put stuff on it or pull their children.
Okay, we talked about how they move around following the different animal groups. They don't have a set place where they live year round. So they can use that sled to put their belongings on. Maybe if they have small children who can't walk, they might put them on the sled. So they would use that sled to help move things. Finn?
You could attach some doggos to it, sit down on it yourself.
So Finn is talking about making like a dog sled. I'm not sure if they had dogs back then as pets. They might have been more of the wild animals. So that might have been a more recent thing that came about. Because I think back 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago, they might not have had that quite yet. I think you might be jumping in history. I know we have lots of other ideas, but I want us to be able to get started. I want you to design your own sled as if you were living in this time period. So are you going to use plastic in your sled? No, they didn't have plastic back then. Can you use nails if you're using wood? Do you think they had nails back then? Not yet.
They had nails.
They had fingernails, but not the nails for the wood. So how would they have attached the wood from the trees, those logs, or the bones? They didn't have string. What would they have used?
They could have used like vines,
Maybe vines from the plants. Maddie?
they could use the bones.
They could use bones to help fix things together. But what could they wrap?
They could use buffalo skin.
Yep.
Or animal
So the buffalo weren't here quite yet. It was the mammoths and the mastodons. So the animals. So they could use the skin maybe to tie stuff together. They could use the sinew or tendons from the animal to use it more like a rope to tie things together. So I know we have lots more ideas. What I want you to do is you are going to put it on your paper. You're going to draw your design. You're going to label it for what the different pieces are. Put like still listening. You're going to put what the purpose of the sled is for. Were they using it to move? Were they using it to travel with? What was their purpose? And I want you to design it and label the different materials that you are using. So I'm going to stop so we can get started.